Are you in a relationship right now where it seems that the other person is constantly pointing out your shortcomings? And if you say anything about their actions or attitudes, they turn it around back on you, start an argument, or actually say that you're the reason for the blame? Have you also started realizing that a lot of the things that they say you do wrong or your shortcomings are seem to actually apply more to them than you? If so, what is going on and why is this happening? Let's explore that in today's video. Welcome back, friends. Berges here today. And when we find ourselves in these types of relationships where someone is pointing out our shortcomings, but a lot of the things that they're pointing out actually applies to them, we have to really see the big picture. And what we're dealing with in these situations is we're dealing with someone who is either not extremely self-aware or not really self-aware at all. And when someone lacks self-awareness, they use what I call projection constantly, projecting on you their situations, their circumstances, their beliefs, their shortcomings. When we look at the concept of projection, we think about Freudian's concept of projection, and that's usually situations, feelings, thoughts, emotions, even actions that someone else can't deal with on their own. They can't deal with it or accept it on their own, and so there's a tendency of projecting it onto other people. And when that happens, we find ourselves in a relationship with someone that has a tendency of using what I call the you are statements. You are this, you are that, you are the victim, you are the narcissist, those types of labels, and they tend to constantly label us when we try to point out anything within them, they get angry, aggressive, even violent, or they begin to start a fight and we never seem to come up with any sort of resolution, right? So we might point out something, but that person denies it, turns it around, basically blames us in the process. And then the argument actually turns from what was really talked about to the way that we brought up the argument, or maybe a word that we use, or the rudeness that we are projecting. So it becomes a totally different argument with no solution. Some examples of you are statements that are interesting. You are the problem. You are the blame, you are the victim, you are the narcissist, you are the reason why I do these things. Okay, and that's very interesting because in the beginning, when we're not ready for this or we're not used to it or we really don't understand what we're dealing with, we may take on ownership of this, right? We might begin to own it. We might own those types of things. Maybe I am creating this reality. Maybe I am part of the problem and not of the solution. And that's good to be able to examine and to look within us and see, right? We want to know exactly what's really happening. But in the process, a lot of times when we take ownership of these situations, we don't allow the other person to see where they stand or what they're contributing to the situation. One of the most interesting points when we think about projection and we think about someone that lacks self-awareness is their inability to want to take accountability for their actions. And so what happens oftentimes is that they will do something or say something, do something that hurts you, say something that hurts you, and there won't be any apology. And if there is any apology, it's a very weak apology, and usually it's a backhanded apology. And in that situation, they don't want to take ownership, they don't want to feel empathy, and they don't really want to see your side of the situation. And I find that interesting because many of us might find ourselves in relationships with people that are not taking accountability for their actions. And they probably haven't taken accountability for their actions for most of their life. And a lot of times with that, there's a bit of entitlement there. And there's also a bit of, when you look back at the parent dynamic and the family dynamic, how they were kind of allowed to be this way or allowed to act like this. Sometimes in situations, the family just steps back and accepts it because they don't want to have the fights, they don't want to have the arguments. And so they enable this behavior. And so as they grow up as adults, that behavior has been enabled and they assume that everybody else is to blame. In the assumption that everybody else is to blame, they don't have to change anything about themselves, which is very interesting. And so if I don't want to take accountability and I don't want to see my problems and I choose to not see that I have anything that I need to work on, then I don't have to take any of that accountability and I can blame everybody else for the shortcomings in my life or for the non-successes in my life so that I don't have to take a good look at myself. Another interesting point is the mental and emotional abuse that you will sometimes find when someone is using projection that is not self-aware. Because it can be emotional abuse and mental abuse because of the questionability. When we begin to question ourselves, did I cause this? Am I part of this problem? And it's good to obviously have self-reflection because that makes us self-aware. However, there becomes a point where you begin to question your reality even more so. And that's where it becomes a little detrimental because we begin to kind of lose the boundaries. We begin to lose some of our identification of who we are by the more and more that we give this person. And also it seems to lack boundaries because we allow them to get away with this, and in the process of trying to tell them or shine some light on the situation because of the arguments or because of the fights or because of the inability to take accountability, we stop. We begin to allow them all this carte blanche to do whatever they want just so we don't have to rock the boat, so we don't have to have the arguments, so we don't have to have the big knockdown, drag-out fight, which there becomes a problem with that because over a period of time, that person that's not taking accountability, that is not self-aware, begins to believe these realities. And we begin to enable that belief system. Another symptom that I see that's interesting when you're dealing with someone who is little or not self-aware is that they have a tendency of using numbing mechanisms. For example, they may smoke weed, drink alcohol, maybe a combination of those or a combination of other drugs in order to numb themselves, in order to numb their feelings. Oftentimes, I believe to a degree that they can sometimes see the part that they play, but they don't want to acknowledge it. I also feel that sometimes if they use these types of drugs and alcohol to numb, they can continue to believe the narrative that they've created. That narrative that you're the problem, that everybody else in the world is the issue, that they're the good person and they're fighting the good fight and everybody else is against them or trying to hurt them or trying to blame them. It's also interesting too how I found that sometimes when people are not obviously self-aware, they project to such a level that they can actually begin to believe their own projection lies, right? So if they're, let's say for example, they're having an affair, they might project that upon you and actually believe that to be true. Question where you are following you, that sort of thing in the process. And the alcohol, the drugs, and the combination of these can also help that to precipitate and to continue that belief system of the false narrative. Ultimately, if you're interacting with someone, whether it's a spouse, a significant other, a boyfriend or girlfriend, or somebody very close to you like a best friend who happens to be projecting on you and seems to lack self-awareness, we really need to begin to ask questions of how we're going to continue this relationship. How are we going to move forward in that relationship? And how do we begin to either see the truth or help them see the truth? Or how do we be able to mitigate the situation? Because it can be very challenging if you're the one that's constantly to blame and the other person has no problems and you're the reason for their problems. This can feel overwhelming. It can also feel as though you're walking on eggshells when you try to point out something that maybe you don't agree with or something that's upsetting. If that person has hurt your feelings or lied to you, and when you try to point it out, it becomes this huge fight. It's blown out of proportion, and somehow it begins again as your fault. We have to really analyze how much longer we're going to be able to interact with this person, and then what kind of level of truth or honesty are we looking for in this relationship. And I think that's very important too, because if we're dealing with someone that is not self-aware, the level of communication is not going to probably be at the level of communication that you want. The level of honesty and being authentic is not going to be at the level that you want either, because again, you're dealing with someone that doesn't see the part that they play or doesn't want to see the part that they play in absolutely anything that they do. If you haven't already, we'd love to have it if you subscribe to the channel, and it shows us that you like the content, as well as giving us a like on this video. In the comments section, are you dealing with someone that you find is somewhat unself-aware? What are some of the habits that you see from these people on a day-to-day basis, some of the habits that might really irritate you? I'm interested in hearing your feedback. In the meantime, don't forget to live your true life.